Hey, fifth grade, for today's writing workshop lesson, we're going to kind of review what we've done with our free verse poem already. Yesterday, I taught a lesson on how to edit using our Google Docs and pushing out documents in Google Classroom, how to make a copy of what you've already done, and how to track those changes. I know this has been difficult for some of you guys because you're learning how to use the technology along with maybe how to use a writing process to compose a text. I think some of you tend to skip some of these steps when you've written pieces before. So I just kind of wanted to walk you through the writing process. And I've talked to you guys about how the writing process is not linear, meaning that you don't have to complete a step before moving on to the next, or you can't go back to a step after you have completed it. The writing process is kind of adaptable to your creative process. However, that doesn't mean that you can skip steps completely. If you do that, it's likely that you'll end up having to go back and redo something just because you didn't take it into consideration, or because there are things that you need to do to make your piece better. So I know I had a few of you who wanted to jump right in and draft first instead of pre-writing. So I just kind of want to walk you through how this is supposed to look, and I'm going to use my topic and my poem to show you my progress. The point of a writing piece, or the point of using a writing process to create a writing piece, is that you will start with something rough, like a big idea, and you will make that idea better, and you will narrow your focus within each step, making your writing piece stronger and better and more effective with each step. So as you can see, this first tab that I have up is my pre-writing. You can see that I started with a broad idea, but not too broad. Like, I didn't talk about both my dogs. I didn't talk about every dog I've ever owned. I didn't talk about dogs in general. I talked about my dog, Albus. And I hadn't taught the lesson on the rule of write about a pebble at this point. But when we are selecting topics, we want to make sure that our topic is broad enough that we can gather lots of details, but narrow enough that we can really bring whatever our topic is to life for our reader. So I started with my dog Albus, and then I just brainstormed a list of details. Now, this is not my full web, but this is what I started with from a video lesson earlier in this year, actually a couple weeks ago. You can see that I got more specific as I moved out from the center. So if you did not complete pre-writing for your current poem, I would like for you to go back and find this. It should be in your drive, or if you're looking in Google Classroom, it's under free verse poem pre-writing. So I would like for you to go back and make sure that you have done this and that it is similar in design to mine. And what I mean by that is that you have a narrow enough topic, and that you only give details about that topic that's in the middle. When I looked at some of your webs or pre-writing, some of you guys had kind of gotten off topic. So you had like 3 or 4 things here, where you maybe had one topic here, but then you jumped to different topics when you got to the yellow boxes, and that would make for a confusing writing piece. If you think about a free verse poem, we need to be narrow enough that we're only talking about one thing. Otherwise, we can't get very specific with that one thing. So If you haven't done that, that's what I want you to do today, is to kind of go back and make sure you've done each of these steps in the writing process so that you can make your writing piece better. So if you jumped in and you wrote a draft before you created this web, then go back to the web and do that. And I know that's backwards, but like I said, the writing process is not linear. We can jump back and forth between these. And once you do that, then I want you to go back to that draft that you created and see if those ideas from your web showed up in your poem. And if they didn't, then put them there. This is actually a form of revising. Like if you went back and did your pre-writing step and then came back to your draft and you made some changes, that's actually revision because you're taking a second look at it after you've gathered more details. Doesn't really matter. There are no rules there. I will say that if you go back and you make some changes to draft one, just make sure that it's making it better. Don't do it for the sake of doing it. Do it for the sake of making your writing stronger, making your writing piece better. So let's take a look at my first draft here. This was just my first attempt at getting my thoughts or ideas for my poem about my dog Albus on paper. So you can see that my title is not a real crafted title. It's just a label that I slapped on to serve as my topic, basically, for my poem. And then I wrote 4 stanzas. And then I just pulled those details from my web. So this was my first try. Then I moved on to the step of revision. So that was when I went in and I changed this from editing. Let me see if I can move that so you can see this. I changed this from editing to suggesting, and then I went back into my poem and made changes. You can see that I have a furry friend. I deleted that and created something completely different. My sweet furry friend. And then I deleted his name is because I felt like that was wordy. And then I deleted named after, and because I feel like readers will get that by just leaving the text that's still there. You can see that every change that I made is in pink, and then there's a comment over here explaining what I just did. When we draft on a computer, that is really, really important because sometimes we change our mind about what we want to keep or what should be there. And so if we delete it completely and just type over it, then we can't get that back. Or if we do get it back, then we lose other changes that we've had. So if you have not completed the step of revision, it's very simple. And some of you guys are struggling with how I created this copy to revise. So I will go back over that really quickly. But the beauty of composing on the computer rather than writing it out by hand is that you don't have to retype everything that you just had. All you have to do is go into the original document, which was your draft 1, and you go to File, and then you say you want to make a copy. Then it creates a new version of that document. All you have to do is name it something else. And so I think what I did was I renamed mine Revision of D1, and then I put my title. And then I said, okay. Then I'm going to cancel because I've already created that. But then before I started making changes on this one, I went up here and I turned this from editing to suggesting. I changed my date. I guess I probably did that before I did suggesting, but I changed my date. So now I can see that I moved from draft 1 on the 2nd of October to the revision of draft 1 on October 6th. So it kind of shows how fast I'm moving through each step. And then it also shows all the changes that I made. Remember, when you go back and you look at your draft, by the way, this would be called draft 2 after we make those changes. But after you go back into that first draft and you're looking at it again, because that's what revision means, just taking a second look. This is not where you track spelling mistakes or punctuation or capitalization. You don't mess with any conventions when you're doing revision unless you have not organized your work into stanzas and lines in the case of poetry. So when you go back and you look at it a second time, you should definitely read it out loud. And if it sounds funny or there's something that needs attention, a lot of times it will show up because you can hear it. It should sound like the poems we've been reading in class. And if it doesn't, then you need to go in and make some changes. And you can see that I decided to do that. I changed a lot of things. I changed a lot of things in every single stanza. And really, that's what a revision should look like. If we were able to get it right the first time, like when we did draft 1, then we would be like some crazy good writers, because even the best, like the published authors that we read, the published poets that we read, they don't get it right the first time. In fact, they probably redo it and go into it more times than we do, even in class, because they want to get it just the way they like it before they push it out or share it with the world, because one, they're going to sell more copies the better the piece is, but two, they don't want to represent themselves that way. They want to represent themselves as writers in a positive way. And so they want to make sure it's exactly how they want it. And that's what the writing process allows us to do, is to keep going into a piece of writing and making it better each time. So once you've revised, again, if you did not do this step or you didn't do it the way that I showed you in the video, I need you to go back, watch that video, create that copy, change it to suggesting, and then show me those changes that you made. I cannot give you a grade on how you're using the writing process if you don't show me the changes you made. We need to be able to prove that we have grown as writers, and that's what this suggesting mode allows us to do. After you're done with your revision, you're going to make a copy of that revision, just the way we did with draft 1. So you'll go in and you'll say file, well, here we go, make a copy. And then instead of calling it revision of D1, we're ready to move on to the step of editing. So we would change the name to, like, I think I changed mine to edited D1. It shouldn't have been D1. It should have been D2, but whatever. D2 of My Dog Albus. Okay. And I'm not going to push OK because I already did that. So I'm going to grab that one now. And again, when I made a copy of this, I went up and I changed it from editing mode to suggesting mode before I started doing anything. And then I used this editing check sheet. Sorry, guys. Should have had that up and ready. And I had this in one window, and I had this in the other. I did a split screen, or I went back and forth between the tabs. And the first thing that I looked for was obvious stuff. Did I capitalize? Did I punctuate? And this one's pretty easy in free verse poetry because there aren't a lot of rules about capitalization and punctuation. The only thing that I found that I really needed to change when I was looking at my work for this is that I had punctuated this sentence, and I hadn't punctuated throughout the other stanzas. So I made that change because I wanted to make sure that I was consistent. Whatever I did, I wanted it to be the same throughout the poem. The next thing that I edited for was spelling. So even though I have spell check, I went in and I highlighted words that I'm not certain about, because we know that Google Docs will suggest a word that it thinks that we're trying to type or trying to spell. And sometimes we go, oh, yeah, put it in there, Google, but it may not be the appropriate word. So any word that I wasn't absolutely certain of, I highlighted it in yellow, and then I ran a spell check. Or the other thing you can do as a writer is just simply Google it. Google the word. Because when you start typing, it's trying to guess what you're typing, and sometimes it will go ahead and suggest it. And if you do a search and you look at the definition and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I was trying to do or trying to say, then you know, and you can substitute it with what you, or I guess a more appropriate word if that happened to you. So I checked on headmaster, schnauzer, and rebellious, and it was fine. By the way, the spell check can always be found in the tools, and it'll check for grammar too. Somebody asked me the other day, what do those blue lines mean? Well, that's a grammar thing. And you have to be careful with free verse poetry, because sometimes the rules of grammar don't always apply. You can kind of arrange things the way that you want. So just use your best judgment if you get the blue lines. If you like the way it sounds and it's not funky, or it's not bad grammar, then you can probably get away with it. It might just be saying, hey, this is an incomplete sentence, or there's no subject verb agreement. Again, you don't really have to worry about those details when you're doing free verse. And then the next thing that I checked for was my title. I realized at that point that I hadn't crafted a title, and I already had an idea of what I wanted to do. So I changed my title, and then I made sure that I capitalized the first, the last, and all the important words in my title. And then I could check that off my list. And the last thing that I had to edit for was the personal pronoun I. Anytime we use the word I in our writing as a word all by itself, it has to be capitalized. And I see a lot of lowercase i's in writing used by students, and we know better. So we need to go back and we need to fix that. And then we're done editing. So the next step then will be polishing and publishing, which I'm not ready to teach you about. So I'm just asking today, after you watch this lesson, that you will go back and you will make sure that you have evidence of your growth as a writer. You'll be able to show me a completed pre-writing web. You'll be able to show me your very first D1, your draft of your poem. You'll be able to show me those revisions you made. You'll be able to show me not just your completed editing check sheet, but the changes you made or the things that you looked for when you edited your piece. So if you don't have that evidence, if you don't have a completed web, if you don't have a completed D1, if you don't have a document called revision of D1, if you don't have a document called edited D1 or whatever your title is, then you need to take time today during Writer's Workshop to go back and do those things. And there are video lessons there to show you. And I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one, or we can email back and forth also. But the main thing is that you go back in and you make sure that you have proof that you have made your writing better and that you're growing as a writer, because that's what we're doing right now in free verse poetry, is learning how to use the writing process to make our writing stronger. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions or problems. I love you guys, and I cannot wait for you to be back in class.